Well, I appreciate the chairman. The chairman is always gracious to make sure that we have equal time and to handle that in that respect. And so I appreciate that, and good to see you from afar. As you know, this hearing is the fourth in our series on white supremacy, and we've had a number of good exchanges and dived into some of the facts over the course of previous three hearings, and I certainly think it's important for us to do so. As you remember, I was particularly moved and wanted to understand the situation in Charlottesville as a University of Virginia graduate. Obviously, that hit close to home, and talking to a mother who lost her daughter sitting there in the downtown mall in Charlottesville, where I used to go as a student, and seeing this horrid series of events unfold, it was important for us to have that conversation. And I think it's important for us to have this conversation. I would note, and the chairman knows, I mean, I've been asking repeatedly for the last year for us to have a hearing, for example, on human trafficking. There's 40 million people around the world suffering from human trafficking, some 20,000 in the United States where we've had actual law enforcement engagement with them, which is a fraction of what we know is actually occurring in the United States, estimates of upwards of 300,000 or 400,000. I think we should find time in our schedule for hearings on matters such as that. As the chairman well knows, I think it's an important issue. And if you think about 300,000 or 400,000 people that are estimated to be engaged in or to be the victims of human trafficking in the United States at any given moment, we ought to look at that. And, look, I think we have to ask the question, why is this now the fourth in a series of hearings? And I don't question the motives of the chairman, but I would have to acknowledge that it is fairly facially obvious over the last, X number of months that my Democratic colleagues really want to perpetrate a narrative that American law enforcement is either systemically racist or composed of white supremacists. And I just categorically reject that characterization of the almost 800,000 law enforcement personnel who are standing up on the thin blue line for each and every one of us every day. As a former federal prosecutor, I firmly believe we go root out crime wherever we find it. We root it out, and we root out hate. We root out racism wherever we find it. That is our job, to go pursue it. I wholly agree with that. But it is a dangerous path. It is a dangerous path that my Democrat colleagues are pursuing in defining our law enforcement personnel as systemically racist. And that's what's happening. That's what these things are doing. That's what this focus is doing. And by the way, it wouldn't matter if this hearing was just focused, that this hearing is just focused on law enforcement. My Democrat colleagues have made it abundantly clear that the United States of America is in and of itself systemically racist. That's the position of the modern Democratic Party, that our nation is systemically racist. And that to me is fundamentally at odds with what this nation actually has stood for and what this nation actually has done. Like, I come from a family with a history in law enforcement. My great-great-grandfather was a Texas Ranger in the county in which I'm sitting right now in the 1870s, in Travis County, Hayes County, and Blanco County. And I'm proud of that. My grandfather was the chief of police of a small West Texas town in Sweetwater, Texas. He died of cancer when my dad was 7. My dad barely knew him because he'd just come back from the war. By all accounts, by everybody I talked to, my grandfather was a good and faithful public servant who was not racist in any way. Everything I understand from my family, my grandmother. When my grandmother was a single mom in West Texas, the first woman county clerk elected in Nolan County, Texas, when my grandfather died of cancer. And I stand by my grandfather. I stand by all the law enforcement officers that I worked with when I was the assistant United States attorney working in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Texas. All of the fine law enforcement officers who worked for me of varying races when I was the first assistant attorney general. And, when I was the first assistant attorney general for Attorney General Ken Paxton here in Texas, we have 4,100 employees. I will wholly acknowledge that irrespective of race for a moment, if 1% of those 4,100 are doing anything crazy, insane, mean, hateful, racist, illegal at any given moment, 1% of that 4,100, that's 41 people. And my job as first assistant attorney general is to go track these things down, have internal investigations, Go look and figure out what's happening. I wholeheartedly embrace and believe in that. But when we, the institution of Congress, make blanket statements using viral videos to define a class of human beings standing on that wall for us every day, I'm troubled by that. There's a significant amount of evidence out there that suggests that there is not structural bias in the criminal justice system regarding arrest, prosecutions, or sentencing. Crime and suspect behavior, not race, determine most police actions. There are 70 million interactions, roughly. I mean, obviously, these are estimates. 70 million interactions between law enforcement and civilians every year. Now, if a million of those are, troubling, problematic for varying different reasons, one of which might be race, one of which almost certainly is race, then we should root that out. But when you then categorically define 70 million police interactions with 800,000 law enforcement personnel as systemically racist, then you're undermining our entire rule of law, right? I mean, we're seeing this unfold right now in front of us. The past few months have brought police into the limelight and sparked a resurgence of anti-law enforcement rhetoric from the left and many in the media. What has been the result? More violence in our streets, more police officers killed in the line of duty. More Americans, many of them in low-income communities, are suffering because their communities are crumbling at the hands of lawless mobs. They can't use the bus stop. They can't to take them across town to get to work because somebody smashed it to pieces. They can't get a loaf of bread from their local corner store because looters ransacked it, forced the owner to close shop for good. The owner of a shop who's been in their family for years is now gone. 45% of Black-owned businesses have been decimated since the beginning of both the virus and all of the unrest on our streets. There are real consequences to what's going on our streets. In many cases, they cannot call the police for help. Just yesterday, there was a thing that went around here in Austin where somebody was running through the Whole Foods in downtown Austin, where everybody's getting their little lattes and buying some arugula for their salads. Somebody's running through and they're worried about it and they call the police. Well, guess what? There was no police to get there. Why? Because the Austin City Council, in its leftist infinite wisdom, has slashed the police department by a third. Look, data shows that when police backlash based on these false narratives follows the release of a viral video, law enforcement tends to be less aggressive in pursuing perpetrators, resulting in an increase in crime and homicide, of which victims include all races. In the 2 weeks following the death of Mr. Floyd, more than 700 police officers were injured. Many lives have been lost and hundreds of millions of dollars in damage to private businesses and public property have been made. Across 20 major cities, the murder rate at the end of June was an average 37% higher than it was at the end of May. The murder rate. These are people. These are murders. And what about the police officer shootings with the intent to kill that we recently saw in Los Angeles and Louisville in the name of defending social justice? There's 2 officers killed in Louisville, at least one of whom was Black. Defending the police, creating broad and false narratives about law enforcement, and encouraging violence in our streets in the name of politics is harming our communities. You can't defund the police. For example, for total homicides year over year for the 15 largest U.S. cities, Austin, in the district that I represent, ranks first at 64% increase. And just a few months ago, the city of Austin, as I said before, defunded 1/3 of the police department. More examples from Austin. 43% increase in murder, 17% increase in aggravated assault, 30% increase in statutory rape, 24% increase in arson, 5% increase in vandalism. Notably, due to their defunding, they canceled the 144th Austin Police Department cadet class, the most diverse cadet class for the department in its history. Half of the graduates were minorities. They canceled it. It's gone. All of those people who wanted to serve in law enforcement, who wanted to serve in the community, wanted to help protect their communities. Again, over half minorities. That class is gone. At least 46 police officers have been killed in the line of duty this year. I read all of their names on the floor of the House of Representatives last week. Where in the hell is the NBA wearing their names on the back of their jersey? Where in the hell is the outrage for the law enforcement officers who lost their lives in the line of duty, standing up on that thin blue line for us? 24-year-old officer Catherine Mary Thine, who was dragged by a car and pinned against a tree, dead. Police officer Brian Brown, who was also killed in a vehicular assault, gone. Sergeant Damon Gutzwiller, who was ambushed, shot, and killed, gone. 24-year-old officer Breanne Leath, who was shot in open fire responding to domestic disturbance, gone, just to name a few. We already have an over 50% increase in felonious officers killed in the line of duty with 3 remaining months left this year. But cities around the nation are defunding their police departments. This committee, in my opinion, is giving a platform to harmful narratives, precluding the very idea of safe streets while hurting our community. Safety and security should be non-negotiable to this body. It's non-negotiable to me as a father, as a Texan, and especially as a member of Congress. I think, Mr. Chairman, I understand what we're doing here in the conversation we're having. And these are important conversations. But we ought to be mindful of those 800,000 men and women who are going to suit up today to stand on that line for us. And I'm always entertained by those who are out on the streets and something happens and there's violence because they're out at some protest. And the next thing you know, they go, where are the police? That's happened to members of this body. Where they're looking around, where are the police? Well, I guarantee you that the thing that we're going to be asking is, where are the police? If we continue to go after and assault them and blanketly condemn them as racist, as an institution of racism, as opposed to doing our lawful duty as members of Congress or as law enforcement officers to go root out every single crime, every single action, one case at a time. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.